Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike's Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. Another tribute episode, Leroy Jordan, Cowboy middle linebacker, mainstay, and a man I spent the afternoon with a number of years ago. Quality guy, high integrity, a real leader among the Tom Landry Cowboys, great teams of the late 60s and up through the mid-70s. Passed away on Saturday. He played from 63 to 76, the middle linebacker, the defensive captain of the Cowboys, member of the College Football Hall of Fame, not an NFL Hall of Famer at this point. Undersized somewhat, although when I met him, he looked trim at 6'1" and 220. He looked like he could still about the same weight when I saw him. He came to one of my men's groups. I have men's groups that I meet with once a month, let's say. We get together and share what's going on. Occasionally we'll have an invited guest to have lunch with us and answer questions. Leroy was a good friend of one of my good friends that was in the group, who's also now passed away, so very sad. But a lot of these guys were 10 years older than me. And the dilemma sometimes you have is, and everybody has it at some point, is when does everybody become first name basis instead of Mr. or Doctor or whatever? And I just figured if I'm calling my friend by his first name, then his friend would also be first name, even though, again, it's a measure of respect to call somebody by a more formal title. I take no offense if somebody calls me by my first name or whatever. And same thing when I was a professor. But I called him Leroy, which now sounds disrespectful, but he was less than 10 years older than me. Again, just an outstanding player. Selected 6th overall in the draft, coming out of Alabama. As I said, pretty much the smallest middle linebacker, but still a lot of intensity. A little bit younger than Ray Nitschke, who had great notoriety with the Packers. I guess there's a trend here. He's about the same age as Dick Butkus, again, totally a Chicago Bear. And much later, Jack Lambert, another middle linebacker that came on when Leroy was retiring. Again, always the Steelers. I think there's something to be said for that. In the hobby love department, being with one team, I think, at least in the old days, was really appreciated, the loyalty factor. We don't see that as much. There's some discussion of, did the cards go up in value or down in value when somebody changes teams? Are you really looking for only that player when he's on your team, or what the dynamic is there? A couple things have happened that are hobby related that I'll just share. One is that a couple weeks ago, I got a lowball offer for a Leroy Jordan autograph card that I had on ComC, actually. So there's no messaging. It's just they make you an offer. And I wasn't incensed. I just thought, because it became known a couple weeks ago that he was on his last days. That alerted me to that. I thought, I'm not going to accept a lowball offer. It just doesn't seem right. Some people just never want to buy anything at full price, but that just doesn't seem right to me. And my other pet peeve, speaking, because I mainly only sell cards really on ComC and eBay, and some of my eBay lots, and this was not a Leroy Jordan lot, but it could have been. I actually don't have that many cards of Leroy Jordan because he really sold very well. Very high demand for Dallas, being a longtime Cowboy and living in the area and being a businessman and well respected. But I get messages from eBay potential buyers saying, see the cards in your picture. Say, for example, if I've got some number of cards of Leroy Jordan and they want to know, are those the cards that are for sale? And I feel like saying, come on, man, what do you think I'm doing? I'm baiting and switching, or I've got an AI to generate a collage of Leroy Jordan cards. I would think it goes without saying that if I'm selling a Leroy Jordan lot and I give you a picture of a Leroy Jordan lot, then as long as it's not multiple lots, that is the lot, then they would accept that. But you can't be snarky on eBay because it just is not appreciated. But I do not understand why they're asking some of the questions. When you go on the Beckett OPG, which I think is very underrated, I think more people should use that. It's very useful to me. Again, cataloging as well as pricing. When you see Leroy Jordan, you bring him up. He doesn't have that many cards, even more modern cards, because he's not a Hall of Famer. But again, very regionally popular, certainly popular, I'm sure, in Alabama as well as in the Dallas area. But he's got Coke caps, which were a big deal. I collected those when I was a kid. So he's on a lot of those coat cap sets, a lot of team issue photos. I had a lot of those, really tried to catalog and checklist those. They're usually, both those items, the coat caps and the team issue photos, are not as valuable just because they're awkward. The caps are three-dimensional and the team issue photos are usually rectangular but larger size. His rookie card is the 1967 Philadelphia Gum, the yellow border, very distinctive. Obviously not his rookie season. He was into the league for a while, but the Philadelphia cards were only sets of 198. So you can't get all the players, but you would think that at some point Leroy Jordan would have come up. But by 67, he's in the set. And his last card is in 76. He played from 63 to 76, and the 76 card, as do some of his other cards, list him as an all-pro. So he was good. I think he fell in the shadow of Butkus somewhat in the last years of Nitschke, but an outstanding player and a star. So if not a superstar, certainly a star. There's always been a mystique. Rich and I did an episode about famous teams or the mystique of teams and dynasties. Certainly, Leroy Jordan was representative of those great Cowboy teams in the late 60s, early to mid 70s when Staubach was coming on. That's what Jerry Jones detractors want to go back to. They want to go back to the old ways and the old success. But those days are over. But still, the Cowboys have a mystique of being America's team. And when I used to canvass the shows and see what was selling, there were more than just regional premiums for Cowboys, and probably Leroy Jordan. Was he treated as a superstar? I don't know about that, but he certainly was probably treated as a star, as a more demand player than just a base, a common. Yeah, I can't say I'm going to miss somebody that I only spent one afternoon with, but when people ask me, surely you've met a lot of players, and what do you think, and who are your favorites? And I just think I've shaken hands with a bunch of them, I've seen a bunch of them, but there aren't that many of them I've sat next to at a lunch or visited with an after. This was a small group of 8 guys, so we got to ask a lot of questions, and he probably had some questions about us. And I think any of these athletes are curious about the hobby. Certainly when Leroy was coming on, there was no organized hobby. People collected in their neighborhood and they traded, but there weren't card shows in the 60s down here in Dallas. In the 70s, when his cards came out, Topps wasn't promoting very heavily. Should he get more respect? When Rich and I talk in some of these tributes, one of the final questions is this going to be an enduring bump? Is the increased scrutiny of Leroy's career, now that he's passed at the age of 84, are we going to see more highlights? And he does have some great highlights, some amazing highlights. But like I said, the autograph cards ought to spike a little bit because he can't sign anymore. But as far as his regular cards, none of them are in the junk wax era. Actually, this is another thing to think about. They're all in the era of poor quality control. And I count that up through even 76. If you have 9s and 10s of anything in the mid-70s and back, you have a great card, whether it's a common or a star or a superstar, because Topps was the only game in town by 68, let's say, and up through 80. So I don't know that they didn't care. They cared, but the standards for quality control, the problem mainly with quality control back in those days was cutting that was off-centered. And I think the tolerances there were not as strictly observed. There's a registration. I think the technology hasn't changed that much. It's just that if you're cutting hundreds of sheets at a time, if they're not fully braced, if there's any shimmy, you're going to get some off-cuts. And I don't think that they were pulled from the distribution. So they did get in the packs. And so we have some off-centered, let's say poor registration sometimes too. Not all the photos are fully crisp. But the greater thing in quality control is in Topps' control in terms of the card stock they used. A lot of the card stock in those days was not, it was the stock they used in the day. And if you fast forward now, you can see there were a lot of other options at greater expense to have card stock that would hold shape or would not be as likely to crease or have notching, different things like that, a little bit thicker stock. And Leroy's cards, if you had nice condition cards, that'd be great. But I don't want to say don't buy now in the hype in the month after, the weeks and month after his passing, but He's worthy. Josh Johnson, noted card ladder co-founder with Chris McGill. Boy, he is going after defensive icons. And my statement to that is go for it, Josh, except that when you're going after some of these iconic players and cards that happen to not be quarterbacks and not even play on the offensive side of the ball, my strategy, Josh, would be to be quiet about it. But I think he's an opinion leader, and he's out there saying, this is what I'm doing, for full transparency, because he is very involved with card ladder. And maybe there'll be people that'll say, you know what, that makes sense to me. It should make sense. These are amazing athletes, and out of 11 offensive starters and 11 defensive starters, there's more than one superstar in that group of 22. Now, it's not just the quarterback. There have been some average or good quarterbacks that have been on great teams and then get accolades for winning Super Bowls. Again, Leroy Jordan was a key contributor to Super Bowl teams, and to me, very worthy of being collected. And like I said, in spite of what Josh does, nowadays I'm more stealth. If I'm looking in the dollar boxes and I'm saying this guy is undervalued, so I'm not necessarily going for the stars. And so to each their own. If you want to follow the herd, you can. But Leroy Jordan, when the Cowboys had a chance to pick sixth back in 1963, I guess they already had Don Meredith, but they chose, out of all the college athletes, they chose Leroy Jordan. When you look at the salary structures for NFL players now, the quarterback gets the most, but we found out to our chagrin in Dallas, Texas, that if these edge rushers, a.k.a. Micah Parsons, they want their due, and they are absolutely contributing to the success of the team, and they want to be paid like a quarterback because they feel their value is that. And I think the Packers agreed on that. And so now we're going to have to face Micah Parsons on the wrong side of the sideline. So thanks, everybody. Rest in peace, Leroy Jordan. I think a life well lived, but it's regrettable we're calling him common cards. He was never a common and was a listed player in some of the sets there, but not a first rank. He just is on the edge of the Hall of Fame. I think he's a worthy Hall of Famer. We'll see. I would certainly vote for him. Rest in peace, Leroy, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another episode. This was just a bonus because I think Leroy was worthy. That's it.